Hello everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of The Five Doctors. The Five Doctors is the 20th anniversary special of Doctor Who, starring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor, John Pertwee as the Third Doctor, Patrick Troughton as the Second Doctor, and Richard Hurndall as the First Doctor. The Five Doctors is the 130th story overall. It's a feature-length 90-minute story and is written by Terence Dicks. So the plot of The Five Doctors is as follows. The Doctor's past incarnations are being snatched out of time and space and transported to the Death Zone in Gallifrey, where they are reunited with some old friends and pitted against their deadliest enemies in the game of Rassilon. Someone is manipulating the Doctor and his companions in order to claim the most ancient and powerful secret of the Time Lords. But can they survive the challenges and uncover the traitor before it's too late? So that is the plot of The Five Doctors. I think The Five Doctors is an excellent story, a great way to celebrate Doctor Who's 20th anniversary, and it was pretty much a very big deal back in the 80s, just like how the 50th anniversary was a big deal in 2013, and how the 60th is a big deal this year as making this video. The production of the story was quite good and very well done, I must say. The sets were brilliant, especially the capital of Gallifrey and Rassilon's tomb, which looked very interesting and very ancient, so to speak. We get a new TARDIS interior, which is similar to the one we got in season 15, well, the last one, but the console has changed, and I really like this interior, and this is actually the last Classic Who interior, and because from this point onward, we don't, this one is pretty much used until the end of the Sylvester McCoy era. Yeah, I think we were supposed to get to new one in season 27, but then obviously that never came to pass. So we do get a scene in the extended edition of the story where the Doctor is pretty much admiring his new redecoration. The location filming was brilliant. The Dev Zone basically looked like a Welsh valley, as I think, which is pretty commonplace in Doctor Who today. But it looked really stunning. I liked how isolated it was. It definitely gave off that disaster, impending doom feel waiting to happen. And it was quite interesting as well. I liked I think it was Eye of Orion, and the place where the Doctor, Tegan, and Turlo were at the start of the story. It looked very peaceful and serene and quite beautiful to be fair. And it was quite nice as well. And the special effects was quite good as well. And I honestly prefer the 1983 version as the updated special effects. I think it was in the remake. I think it was released when the DVD was re-released. That looked quite off, so to speak. I also loved the time scoop. This was in the 1983 version. It was just like a black triangle I think it looked quite interesting. Even though it looked a bit cheesy at first, but it's a good cheesy. I don't like how it pretty much became like a spinning, swirling thing in the remaster. And I think it kind of did lose its appeal in there, to be honest. And it also got rid of that the very funny thing if we're getting captured by this time scoop whenever the time scoop captured someone, they'll pretty much show whoever got captured their face in the triangle, so to speak. And for example, I think especially mentioned the second Doctor and the Brigadier when they got captured, they both had very funny faces as if they were just they were just getting tortured or something. It looked quite funny. The script was really good, and the direction by Peter Moffat was quite good as well. The plot was also very good, even though there was a bit of fan service, which did backfire, but most of the fan service did actually work in its favour. I liked how the plot was able to utilize all five Doctors in a capacity of a sort, even though I liked they pretty much was how they pretty much explained why the fourth Doctor wasn't in the story, because he did get captured by the time scoop, but then him and the Doctor and the fourth Doctor Romana were trapped in a time eddy, so that's why they weren't in this story. But in actual reasons, I'll explain why Tom Baker didn't actually do this story. But it was very creative, even though they did use it in the three Doctors with the first Doctor, but he trapped in a time eddy because William Hartnell was unwell to come to studio filming, so he pretty much had to do it in a shed, or I think it was but then because of this, I think it allowed us to enjoy all four Doctors, even though they were on screen together for at least last couple of minutes in the story. It worked, and I thought it was quite cool. The pacing was very good, and they made use of the 90 minutes. Although I think the 1995 extended edition, in my opinion, actually ruined the Five Doctors. Because the extended edition pretty much introduced all the deleted scenes from this, and I think they're deleted scenes for a reason, because they were just unnecessary filler and just made the story drag out a little bit more. They just thought it was quite, yeah, yeah. But so though I do think that the plot of immortality and all this, the theme of immortality and its backside was a good theme here. And even though it was made use here of you here, but it was kind of like hammered down a bit, but it was still quite interesting to be fair, right? Because obviously the prize of immortality pretty much etched into Rassilon's tomb, as especially with the proverb the first Doctor mentioned, to lose is to win and to win is to lose. Immortality is a big curse, so you're just better off living a normal life until you die. I think there was some very incredible moments in the story that really made the Five Doctors brilliant and made it stand out compared to other multi-Doctor stories. And it really made, especially how the Fifth Doctor was affected by every time his past incarnation was captured by the time scoop. He felt as if he was fading away, and I think one of my favorite scenes was when the Third Doctor got captured by the time scoop. He was driving Bessie. That was also quite cool. The Rastalon warrior robots massacring the Cybermen, which was, I really like the scenes they were all in. Because they just caused havoc and destruction everywhere, which caused the Third Doctor and Sarah to hide. And I really like the scenes where I had the returns of all the companions, especially the ones in the tower in the Death Zone. And I really like Jamie and Zoe's return, as it pretty much reminded me of how much I really enjoyed the Patrick Troughton era, and how the second Doctor, Jamie and Zoe, are pretty much my favourite TARDIS team for the Troughton era. A scene I thought was very powerful is when the Doctors 1, 2, and 3 were trying to telepathically communicate with the Fifth Doctor, who had been hypnotized by Barusa, so they can break him out of the hypnosis to stop Barusa from pretty much claiming immortality for himself. The ending was quite cool, especially when Flavia asked the Doctor to be president, and the Fifth Doctor, and then the Doctor was like, "You're holding special powers until I come back." He just pretty much rushes into the TARDIS with Tegan and Turlo, and then the TARDIS departs Gallifrey, and then Tegan asks the Doctor if he's deliberately on the run in a rackety old TARDIS, and the Doctor pretty much responded, "That's how it all started." And I think that's how the story ended. I thought that was pretty cool, so to speak. So on to the acting. So this is going to take a long time to get through this, so be bear with. I thought Peter Davison was quite fantastic in the story, even though I do feel as if he had to take a back seat in his own story compared to his other predecessors. But he did have his own mini storyline, which was quite good. This is where he took the Master's teleport and teleported himself into the capital to confront whoever was taking his past selves out of their timelines. And it turned out to be Barusa, who wanted immortality and hypnotized the Fifth Doctor so he can enter Rassilon's tomb. After his TARDIS landed on Gallifrey, he was the first to meet the Doctor and Susan, which was a nice little amalgamation of the past and present meeting up. I did like the ending when Flavia said to the Doctor he should run for president, but then he refused and ran into the TARDIS with Tegan and Turlo questioning the Doctor as to why he turned it down. And as I said before, the Doctor said that's how it all started. The delivery of that line was quite well done, and I think shortly after filming, or at least some point before season 21 started filming, Peter Davison announced that he was going to leave Doctor Who. Yeah, I think following the advice of Patrick Troughton in 1981 and the quality of the scripts in Peter Davison, I think season 20 caused Peter Davison to just call it quits. And Tom Baker doesn't physically appear in the Fourth Doctor in the story, but he was supposed to, but talks with John Nathan Turner fell through, and so Tom Baker had declined. But I think this is a decision he said to have later regretted, as there was pretty evidence as to why he came back for a little cameo, Tom Baker, not as the Fourth Doctor, in the 50th anniversary, the Day of the Doctor. So to compensate this, scenes from Shada, the scenes that were filmed, because Shudder never made it to air, so they were pretty much using this story. So the scenes that were used was when the Doctor and Romana were punting on, I think it was in Cambridge, and that's how they were captured in the time scoop, and how they got trapped in the time eddy. And when the day was done, they pretty much used the ending of the. I think they used part two, the start of part three when this is when Romana had saved the Doctor from Skagra's mind spheres, but by landing the tenders nearby, which was why they escaped. John Pertwee was fantastic as usual because he is my favourite classic Doctor. Although I do feel as if the third Doctor is a bit more stubborn and a bit more arrogant for some odd reason, especially when he refused to believe that the Master was the Master when he was explaining what was happening. Free got captured by the time scoop when he was driving Betty, which is how he ended up in Gallifrey. So the third Doctor was pretty much driving Bessie on Gallifrey, which was quite cool. He was paired with Sarah Jane, so it was nice to see them together because they did have a good report in season 11. I loved how he said reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. This story was one of the very few times he actually says the term in full. He actually says reverse the polarity, but doesn't actually add neutron flow to the rest to his famous saying. Patrick Troughton was great, and I do think that the second Doctor pretty much stole the show. You can see how energetic he was, and I loved how he never lost the energy for Doctor Who, even after leaving in 1969, which is why he returned for other multi-Doctor stories afterwards. I loved his dynamic with the Brigadier. I love how 2 was written and how his appearance pretty much ties in with the Season 6B theory, and I like how Troughton does return again in The Two Doctors in Season 22. I loved how he was trying to recite the Gallifreyan nursery rhyme when he and the Brig were trying to enter Rassilon's tower, and the Brigadier was wondering, what on earth are you saying? And I liked how the second Doctor is pretty much explaining what the Dev Zone actually was. And finally, we have Richard Herndon as the first Doctor. William Hartnell sadly passed away in 1975, although Hartnell was actually credited for the cold open, which was pretty much his one day I should come back speech whilst Susan was leaving the Dalek invasion of Earth. Richard Herndon was okay. I do think like he wasn't as great as the first Doctor, but he did more of a job than Hartnell could have done because Hartnell couldn't do as much because of his health issues. But he did have a good rapport with Tegan when they were together, and as I said, I liked how the past and the present were pretty much it was used in the story in terms of the Doctor and the Companions. And unfortunately, Richard Herndon passed away shortly after the Five Doctors aired, and there was a rumor which has been since debunked that he wasn't even paid at all during filming of the story. So yeah, that's the Doctors. So I'll be getting onto the Companions. So first off, I'll be speaking about Tegan and Turlough here, and then the returning companions I'll be speaking about after this. So I think Janet Fielding was quite good. Tegan is paired with the first Doctor for when they go to Rassilon's tomb. So I think her and the first Doctor are a good pair because of their contrast. Because obviously we know how very Tegan is very opinionated. She's quite stubborn and pretty much has the last saying some things, and she's quite argumentative. And how the first Doctor is also stubborn, but he's very old fashioned and a bit chauvinistic. But they did work together to get across the checkered floor of doom, making its return from death to the Daleks to try and escape from the Master and the Cybermen. I did think that there was a scene when Tegan called the first Doctor Doc, which I thought that was quite forced, but it was pretty much a reference to how the first Doctor was always like, please call me Doctor, not Doc. Mark Strickson did a good job with what he was given, even though Turlough spent at least 90% of the story in the TARDIS, whilst the first Doctor and Tegan went to the tower, turned. So basically, they just stayed in the TARDIS and just watched the events unfold. Even though they did witness the Cybermen trying to blow up the TARDIS, and that was pretty much it. I didn't really like that. So, for our returning companions, first off, we have Susan Foreman. We last saw Susan in the Dalek invasion of Earth, and she's brought to the Dev Zone where she reunites with her beloved grandfather, the First Doctor, and the two are able to destroy a Dalek before meeting up with the Fifth Doctor in his TARDIS. Whilst everyone's off to Rassilon's tomb, her and Turlough remain in the TARDIS. It was good to see Susan again after such a very long time. It did pretty much make me a bit sad how she pretty much didn't really do much of anything in the story. So initially, she wasn't have referred to the Doctor as the first Doctor as grandfather because John Nathan Turner did not want any mention of the Doctor possibly having sex. But then Caroline Ford pretty much had to convince John Nathan Turner to let her say grandfather a few times. She pretty much, I think she even threatened to drop out of the Five Doctors altogether if this did not happen. So the Brigadier, even though we last saw him recently in Mordred Undead, here, before he was captured by the time scoop with the second Doctor, he's being interviewed about for a newspaper, and the continuary is about his time of unit, and he's telling another unit troop or something about the Doctor, and he refers to the Doctor as wonderful chaps, all of them, which was a nice scene moment where the Brigadier actually acknowledges his respect for the Doctor. So I think he was paired with the second Doctor for most of the story, as the two were captured by the time scoop together. And before Tom Baker was to have returned, I think the Brigadier, I think he was supposed to be paired with the fourth Doctor. The three was of Sarah, and I think the second Doctor is meant to be with Victoria in the story. So yeah. So obviously I think the story pretty much takes place so shortly after Mordred Undead, which is the reason why he's able to remember Tegan. And the last time we actually see the Brigadier, it won't be until season 26. So I think so. My favorite scene of the entire story was pretty much laid out the master of a punch, and I think that was incredibly badass by the Brigadier because you all know how the master put the Brigadier through hell in during the Third Doctor's era. So I think it was nice for the Brigadier to just lamp him one. He just didn't even think twice because obviously the master had changed face, so he just immediately knew that was the master. Also, obviously, I think Roger Delgado and Anthony Ainley do kind of look alike, so the Brigadier pretty much just knew and just lamped a big punch on him. So we also have Sarah Jane Smith. She was last seen in the K9 Company, the first Doctor Who spin-off that wasn't picked up. So she ends up on Gallifrey like everyone else. She does fall down this small hill, but Elizabeth Sladen was trying to make this scene quite serious, but then it was quite unfortunate because that was just very bad writing, and how Sarah Jane was trying to make it quite serious, as if she just fell off a 50, like a 50-foot building, and but it was just it was quite funny, but then yeah, it was just it was just a bad scene that shouldn't have even happened. She's rescued by the third Doctor, and the two are together for most of the story. It was great seeing Sarah Jane Smith back, but I do feel as if Terence Dick decided to make Sarah how she was written in late season 13 slash season 14, because as I said before, I didn't really like how Sarah Jane was pretty much reduced as a vulnerable damsel in distress. Then we also have K9. The K9 we see here was actually the K9 we saw back in K9 and Company. So he pretty much warns Sarah Jane. He's trying to warn Sarah Jane, but then she pretty much doesn't listen, and then after Sarah Jane drives off, she says, "Danger, mistress, danger, doctor," or somewhere in that order. So yeah, Romana. So obviously played by Sarah Lala Lord. So she only appears in clips that was used from Shada, and she's still credited for it. And we also have Liz Shaw. She was last seen in Inferno, and she's in the Death Zone along with Mike Yates, warning the Third Doctor not to continue. So once the Third Doctor proceeds, she pretty much yells, "Stop him!" And then her and Yates pretty much just fade away. Caroline and John really delivered that line. It was great seeing Liz again after only being in 4 stories. She made a very big impact, and then she is quite good here. Then we have Captain Mike Yates. We last saw him in Planet of the Spiders, and he appears with Liz to warn the Third Doctor. But I do kind of find it a bit odd how him and Liz Shaw are together here, even though during their times on the show, he pretty much was started to be featured a bit more after Liz left the show. Liz went back to Cambridge. So this is between Infernal and Terror of the Autons, and Mike Yates debuts in Terror of the Autons. And we have Jamie McCrimmon. We last saw him in the War Games. He appears with Zoe to warn the Second Doctor not to press onto the tower. And I really liked how the Second Doctor was very happy to see them, but then They fade when the second Doctor realizes that Jamie and Zoe could not possibly remember their travels with him because their memories were wiped by the Time Lords in the War Games when Jamie mentions the Brigadier. This does cause a bit of a plot hole because the second Doctor shouldn't actually remember or know that Jamie and Zoe's memories were wiped, but then it can be dismissed because of the season 6B theory. And lastly, we have Zoe Harriet, last appearing in the War Games. She appears with Jamie to warn the Doctor not to continue. Wendy Padbury was actually pregnant when she filmed this scene, but unfortunately she miscarried, so yeah, that's it for our companions. So now on to the side cast. They were quite good. So first off, we had Castellan Jericho. Returning from the Arc of Infinity, he was concerned about what was happening to the Doctor, and he was actually thrown by Barusa for being the one responsible for abducting the Doctors and subject to the Mind Probe. Well, this is actually a very popular meme in the Doctor Who community, but Jericho ended up getting killed. He was alright, but the Mind Probe delivery was quite badly delivered. It was very monotone and just very much like, oh no, not the Mind Probe. It was just. I think they even made fun of it on the DVD commentary for this. Then we had Flavia. She was the Chancellor under President Barusa. She was kind to the Fifth Doctor when Barusa was made apart to be Grasslon's tomb and even gave the Doctor authority to be president. But then, obviously, the Doctor declined and went back to the TARDIS. She was a good character. Then we had the Raston Warrior robots. These are robots that are very OP, but that they can detect the slightest movement and they can kill instantly. Plus, they move at lightning speed, so when the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane encountered them, they pretty much had to hide, and this is where they witnessed the Raston Warrior robots just massacring the Cybermen, and that was an incredible scene, especially for Adric lovers. And of course, we have Rassilon, a key figure in the Time Lord Society, as he was one of the founders. His tomb was in the tower, and expanded media actually say he was uploaded into the Matrix, and made he was the one that made up the game and the dev zone to try and see who wanted immortality. He granted immortality to Barusa, and obviously made Barusa part of his little ornaments. But then he offered the same to the Doctors, and they all declined. Rassilon was a great character. I do think that this is the first time he actually appears on this show, and this is I think this is obviously where the seal of Rassilon is actually where the seal of Rassilon actually comes from, so to speak. So now we have our villains. We do have quite a few one-off villains returning, like the Daleks. Well, a singular Dalek was there, and the Yeti. But here are the three main villains of this story. First off, we have the Cybermen. They were brought to the Death Zone by Barusa, and their motives are a teensy bit unclear, but they did reluctantly work with the Master to try and play the game of Rassilon, but they all get killed by the checkered floor of doom, and the others got killed by the Rassilon warrior robots. So and then we had the Master. Initially, he was summoned to Gallifrey by the Time Lord to try and rescue the Doctor and his past selves, in return for a new regeneration cycle. He agrees to do this, but I do think he agreed for both getting a new regeneration cycle and so he can personally kill the Doctors themselves. He meets the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane first, and Free thought the Master was lying when about being sent to help the Doctors, even though the Time Lords actually gave him the teleport to take him back to the capital, but the Doctor thought it was forged or stolen. And the Master does do some good things, like tricking the Cybermen crossing the checkered floor of doom, and which pretty much killed all of them. But then the Master's true intentions came out when he wanted to kill every single one, kill all the Doctors, but he was stopped by the Brigadier via a punch. Anthony Ainley was great here, and no cheap obvious disguises. It was just him as the Master himself. I do think this is definitely one of his best performances. And lastly, we have our big bad, which was the Time Lord President the Time Lord President in Barusa. Having regenerated once again, he's had something of a personality transplant, as he's more ruthless. He wanted immortality from Rassilon, so he kidnapped the first four Doctors and their companions, and four of them were trapped in the Time Eddy. So we brought back some of the Doctor's old foes, so you can all play the game of Rassilon. He framed Jericho, so Jericho ended up getting killed, so he can save his own skin, and he wanted to use the Doctor so they can all find the clues and whatnot in trying to get to the tomb of Rassilon himself, so he can claim immortality for himself. But that backfired him big time because Rassilon pretty much made him immortal and he was a part of the sarcophagus. Even I didn't really like how Russo randomly became evil because in all the Gallifrey stories, he was always there and he was always quite helpful towards the Doctor. He was also a very good ally. So as much as I enjoyed the Five Doctors, I do think there were some faults. I did mention some already, but I'll mention them again. First off, I do think there were too many characters, which was obvious fan service. And as a result of this, some characters didn't really do much of anything, and they're just pretty much reduced to asking the Doctor questions. The Cybermen were obviously made very weak because obviously Terrence Dix didn't really like the Cybermen. Eric said he wanted them to be in the story, so which Dix granted, but then obviously he wanted to just have them destroyed in very obvious ways, like the checkered floor of doom and the resting warrior robots. Considering how well they were used in Earthshock, and seeing them getting destroyed all over the place was quite jarring, so to speak. That scene when Sarah Jane fell off that small hill, it looked quite silly. Plus, I don't blame Elizabeth Sade for trying to give the scene more gravitas, but it just didn't work. And I feel as if Terrence Dicks just wanted Sarah Jane to be a damsel in distress because the third Doctor, pretty much had to save her. It was a big setback after seeing how well she did on her own in Kanan and Company. Barusa being evil didn't really make any sense because he did help the Doctor in the last few stories, and oh no, not the Mind Probe. That was probably one of the worst delivered lines I've ever heard. And finally, Turlo and Susan. They spend most of the story in the TARDIS, and I feel as if Eric Saywood and Terrence Dicks just gave up on them, just left them in the TARDIS. And this is a huge problem with Turlo during his time in the TARDIS, and as the writers didn't know what to do with him. So to conclude, I think The Five Doctors was a wonderful way to celebrate 20 years of the show. Despite its faults, it's a joy to watch and a great way to reminisce over your favourite Doctors, and it is definitely one of the best stories in the Peter Davison era, and it's such a shame what comes after this was just pretty much spelled the end for Doctor Who, so I give The Five Doctors a 9 out of 10. My next review will be The Infamous Warriors of the Deep, the first story of season 21, and that was a season that pretty much was basically the death knell for classic Doctor Who. So thanks for watching. Please let me know what you thought of the Five Doctors and this review. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Click the notification bell so you can know when I'm posting videos. Like this video, share it. Until then, see you later.